The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership.
When those team members go home at the end of the day, they're in a position to be the best parents and partners and contributing members of society they can be. And then who knows what impact that can have on our social outcomes? What impact might that have on our domestic violence? What outcome might that have on alcoholism? If we dared to dream what's possible if there was enough organisations around the world that cared in this way, what kind of world we might be living in.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. Let me read you something from the introduction of the book, Human Work, 5 Leadership Mindsets for Humanizing the Workplace, written by my guests on the podcast today, Leanne Holdsworth and Naryan Wong. What if the best workplace we've ever experienced is just a fraction of what is possible? Dare we dream of something so far beyond business as usual that it feels like a fantasy? To venture past the workplaces of the past and into the unknown to imagine and create something recognizably different. To create truly human work. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know that there is a better way to work than what we're traditionally accustomed to. There is a better way to lead, and it affects so much more than just our work lives. And what Leanne and Naryan are trying to do in Human Work is illustrate the extraordinary possibilities when you create workplaces centered on care, connection, and collaboration. When you think of something so far beyond business as usual. Leanne and Naryan are both part of the Human Work Network, and you can find out more about it and them and their book at humanworknetwork.com. On this podcast, we're going to talk about the 5 leadership mindsets mentioned in their book's title, but we're going to start our conversation off today with Naryan and Leanne addressing the very question asked in their introduction. What if the best workplace we've ever experienced is just a fraction of what is possible?
It's the kind of line that just invites you to take stock of what is present with you and what would take it a little bit further. And like, even on this podcast, could we even have the conversation around what would make this a better experience for each of us and the audience and whomever else may be associated with it? And it's that kind of question that invites you into the present moment, I think, that actually has some power for change, maybe.
What I would add is that we hold so many assumptions about the relationship between the organization and the human being. And like, what if we were really able to say, can we just loosen off those assumptions for a minute and imagine a workplace that was in service, not just to the purpose of the organization, not just to the humans that work there, but actually a vehicle for our whole social system to improve the outcomes for our fellow human beings. Like, we have a dream that the ripple effect of organizations like Barry-Wehmiller, where the humans have an experience that leaves them feeling so loved and cared for, ripples out into their families, so that when those team members go home at the end of the day, they're in a position to be the best parents and partners and contributing members of society they can be. And then who knows what impact that can have on our social outcomes? What impact might that have on our domestic violence? What outcome might that have on alcoholism? You know, like, if we dared to dream what's possible if there was enough organizations around the world that cared in this way, what kind of world we might be living in.
What put you on a journey to writing a book like this?
I really do love telling the story about what really woke me up to human work. And I graduated when I was 22 as a chartered accountant, and I went and worked in the corporate sector. And after about 4 years, it became obvious to me that getting in the lift in the morning and leaving most of who I was in the lobby just wasn't sustainable. Like, it really felt like it was not okay for me to bring all of myself. And I could never really work out how come the leaders in the organization couldn't see that there was so much more that I would bring if I felt like I had this permission to bring all of me, right? And so, yeah, after about 4 years, I just thought, oh, this is just not okay for me. I'm going to have to leave the corporate world. The corporate world's just not for me. And so ran away to the bottom corner of New Zealand with my husband, and we set up a bed and breakfast down there a couple of years later, and living the good life in the country, growing vegetables, and while I was there, I got to participate in a values-based leadership forum that Johnson & Johnson were putting on across Australia and New Zealand, and what I saw was that my experience was not personal. My experience of working in the corporate world was systemic. This idea of, as humans, us only being able to bring the bit that makes the money, this narrow bit, rather than all of who we are, was an experience that was common across these 80 other participants at this program. And so I had one of those aha moments, which was, oh, I'm going to actually have to dedicate the rest of my life to making workplaces more human, so that we can all feel like we can be our best selves at work and bring all of us. So that was kind of what happened. And that was, well, I'm 53 now, so decades ago. And I've just had the privilege really of finding ways of being able to live my purpose of making work more human in various ways. And so this book, Human Work, is how Naryan and I have come together to really make an impact at this point in time in my life.
It's funny, I'm actually thinking of my parents when I think about this. Both my parents worked in human resources. My dad in particular was in leadership, and he was doing something that he called strategic HR. And now I would think of that as creating human workplaces, actually. And so growing up, I had this perspective of what it would mean to work in business, what it would be like to work in a company. And like Leanne, I actually had a degree in accounting, and going into the workplace, just feeling what a difference it was being in a 50,000 person corporation, and doing the work to create what I sensed was possible in workplaces, and constantly scratching my head thinking, I wonder why it's so difficult. Like, it kind of just seems obvious that we would be good to each other and want to bring out the best in each other. And I also feel alone in this. I wonder why I seem to be following a different map than many others. And it wasn't until later that I started to be able to connect the dots and see I'm not the only one here doing this. There's actually a bunch of other people that are doing this work in different ways, following different roadmaps. And so when Leanne invited me to join into this book conversation, I was excited because it was getting to hang out with 10 other people who each had their own map and understanding of what human work meant. And all of us were very aligned on just feeling the importance of the work and being able to create something that would help push this conversation forward for the next generation, for the people that are currently in business. And I mean, I also wrote it for my peers who are still doing a lot of work in different companies, and just what would be most supportive there. The book project had already been going for about a year when I joined. I was actually invited just to help with some visual note taking, because there were so many different perspectives and a whole process of integration. And I think as I continued to do some of the integration of what do all these ideas have in common, what's the bigger picture when we can see everything that we're seeing right now, I think the group found value in that and invited me to write about what I was seeing, and that ended up forming a big part of the book.
And I think the thing that I would add is Naryan and I both work for a firm called Cultivating Leadership. When I say a firm, I mean a loose firm. We're really a group of folk from around the world who all care about something similar, which is workplaces being more human. There's about 90 of us around the world. And so it was easy for us to be able to find people who really cared about this to work on this book project. And we've also got a couple of people who have worked on the book from outside of Cultivating Leadership. But it was easy to spot Naryan as somebody who had so much wisdom to share at, dare I say it, Naryan, a young age. And so it was, he just seemed like a natural writing partner. So this book is written by Naryan, myself, and our friends. I guess it started 20 years ago when I wrote my first book, A New Generation of Business Leaders, and that was limited to Australia and New Zealand, celebrating business leaders who cared more than just about the financial bottom line. So who also cared about the environment or community or, the folk who worked in the organizations. And so I knew what it took to pull a book like this together. But then in about 2016, I was lucky enough to come over to your very own institution, Brent, and study at what was the BW Leadership Institute, which is now Chapman & Co., and do the Beyond Benchmarking program in about 2016. And so I had the opportunity to meet Bob Chapman there, and was just so inspired by what you all do there at Barry-Wehmiller, and I was really keen to do what I could to contribute to, I don't know, having other people know about the kind of ways that you can lead by caring about your people. And in the end, the book was released in April 2023 after it took us 3 years of finding leaders. Obviously, we interviewed Bob Chapman and then about another 10 leaders from around the world. We really wanted to get diversity of voices, so we got leaders from New Zealand, from the Netherlands, from the Philippines, from the US, from Europe, really diverse stories, so that we could really learn what were some different approaches to being able to bring more of this human-centric way of leading into organizations.
How did your ideas about what the book would be about or what you were writing, how did it change the more leaders that you talked to?
It was kind of interesting almost having this different source material, listening for what really mattered to these leaders. It's like there was something behind the words that they were sharing. Some of the stories felt like, oh yeah, okay, this is a bit corporate speak. This is the kind of story that they might share in front of all of their employees to help create the narrative of the workplace we're building together. But then with the book team, I found a lot of the conversations got into a deeper place, a place of questioning and curiosity. And where we try to go in the book is looking at what's underlying the stories. What's the way of thinking that underlies the advice that these leaders would like to share?
The book ended up being a completely different product at the end than what we imagined it would be at the beginning. The thing that surprised us the most as we spoke to leaders while we were doing the research was that there seemed to be these different doorways, if you like, that the leaders were coming into making work more human. So for some leaders, they really cared about love and care, Bob Chapman seems to me to be a leader like this. He really deeply cares about human beings. Then there were some other leaders that came from this perspective of actually what's most important to us is creating an organization that's deeply steeped in learning and growth. So more like deliberately developmental organizations. And then there were some leaders who came from, these varying things that felt really important to them in terms of creating a more human-centric organization. So we ended up in a place of learning about these different mindsets that leaders came into their leadership with. And sometimes they held all of these mindsets and sometimes they held some of them. But I guess it helped us really understand the validity of wherever a leader comes from to want to make work more human, rather than, I kind of thought it was all going to come from this deep love of human beings, but it's not all that, there are these different approaches.
you guys settled on 5 leadership mindsets for humanizing the workplace. Tell me why you landed on this and how you landed on this.
I wish I could show you the whiteboarding sessions that we went through and just how many different formulations of the ideas that we went through.
It seemed like they didn't really come together till the end, and we are talking, in total 3 years. So we'd hear something and we'd be like, oh wow, listen to the leader talk about belonging. Great. So we'd kind of go down this whole writing about belonging and what we were hearing, but then we heard so much. So we, as Naryan says, it was just like this way of constantly sieving and thematicizing, that's not a word. We don't even use that down here in New Zealand. But yeah, bringing together these ideas. But
I think part of what we built out to be the mindsets was collections of assumptions that leaders would make. So it was almost like, what is each leader not talking about that would kind of guide us. The purpose, like how would they describe what human work is to them? How would they describe the thing that they're trying to do? Are they trying to create a learning organization? Are they trying to create spaces where everyone cares about each other? And these things seem to start to fit together when we were looking at the mindsets and the directions that people were driving. And then we came up with some names for them that seemed to be good handles. And of course, I think we spend a few pages in the book talking about not wanting to necessarily categorize people, because people do hold multiple mindsets. There are multiple perspectives that a single leader can take as they're doing this work, but also wanting to create something that we can linguistically communicate some themes and patterns. And so we were hoping actually that the reader of the book will find that one of their mindsets really resonates with them, and they say, oh, when I read this, I feel seen. This is how I think about it. And maybe a couple of those mindsets will resonate, maybe not all of them. And we also hope that a couple of the mindsets that we wrote about don't connect at all. Because that's the amount of difference that we're attempting to hold with these 5 mindsets, that they shouldn't resonate with everyone.
And I also think I might just add that, I mean, what became really obvious was that these different approaches that the leaders were taking meant that we could never write a manual that said, right, if you want to do workplaces that are really human, firstly you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. Like, the complex nature of the systems of workplaces meant that the context matters, and so because we quickly found that there were these various ways in, so there was no manual. I mean, I don't know that we set out to write a manual either, but there was no kind of 5-step process. This is how you do it. It seemed to just unfold on itself, if you like, Brent, that if you can't give somebody a 5-step process, the least you can do is help step them through what kinds of mindsets are useful to hold if you really truly want to lead from a human perspective.
Let's talk a little bit about the learning and growth mindset.
They see themselves continuously on a learning journey. And there's a lot of experimentation in the workplaces that they create. We don't learn without mistakes. Inner work is so crucial to the outer success that we see. A focus on personal development, and even what we refer to as a deliberately developmental organization, which is a whole culture that is really designed to support the learning and development of everybody, not just through isolated learning sessions or skill development and training, but where the very DNA of the organization is one that is continuously learning and growing. And that same DNA is felt within the individuals who lead it too. So it's kind of the mindset of the leader really does get reflected in the DNA of the organization.
These leaders were deeply committed to their own developmental journey before they had any expectation that any of their other leaders or folk in the organization would be able to go down that pathway. These were leaders that were very reflective, that made their growth edges visible. We asked questions in our interviews of leaders of, what is at your growth edge right now? What is the hardest thing for you that you're learning about yourself in the space of leading an organization in this truly human way? And so, there were just some leaders who just naturally fell into this way of exemplifying learning and growth. For each of these mindsets, there's a shadow side, right? So there are strengths and there are shadow sides. And if you lean too heavily into this mindset of learning and growth, then you can have an environment that's just so uncomfortable, because learning is uncomfortable, but the strengths of this mindset are that you've got an organization that's constantly learning, experimenting, and evolving, and where there's permission to not know. And when there's permission to not know, then what's the freedom associated with that for folk, right? The freedom to be able to play rather than to have to be certain. And for so many leaders leading in this really complex time, we can't know. And yet the pressures are so, the external pressures to have all the answers are really quite intense. So one of the strengths of this mindset is, well, can we just loosen off the having to know and getting the right answer, and get more perspectives in the room and play with ideas rather than have to be certain and head for the long game?
For mindset 2, what do you mean when you say everyone is a leader?
The I statement for this one is, I strive to empower the leadership of those around me. It's the kind of leader who believes in lifting up everyone around them. And they also, again, similar to the last one, they see their own limits. And they believe that an organization can be more if they're able to support the people around them. So they're all about empowering individual agency, giving people autonomy, and that's the key to being at our best. They like to do things like allowing decisions to be made closest to their impact. So they tend not to be hierarchical. In fact, some of the leaders that we interviewed operate under holacracies, which is, one CEO, or I should say former CEO, actually stepped back as CEO and sought to influence purely through sort of the merit of the vision that he was creating, rather than through formal authority, which I think is kind of like on the edge for me of what this mindset looks like.
Is there a way that could be a hindrance or a negative in a sense?
Some of the shadow sides that we suspect would be over-including people and creating indebtedness through being the one to include others. Like, you owe me for bringing you into this, or where we push responsibility down, which could be a way of sort of pushing blame down. Like, actually, I'm the leader, but I don't want to be responsible for this decision. So I'm gonna give that to other people that work for me, and they'll take the fall if this doesn't go right. That would be the part of the shadow.
Let's talk about mindset 3, belonging. Belonging seems like it should always be a leadership mindset. Is that something that needs to be specific in being called out?
It doesn't even need to be said, Brent, is the question, right? For some leaders, it's difficult to pay attention to things beyond financial performance, And so this idea that seems so obvious to us, I think does need to be called out. And in fact, the more that we dug into this idea of belonging, the more of those concentric circles out into society we started to find. So, we talk a lot about the value of ensuring people really feel seen, and how critical, you guys talk about this a lot, this idea of listening to people really is in order for them to feel seen, and how feeling seen helps people with belonging. But as well as thinking about it inside the organization, we talk to leaders like Joseph Kenner from Greyston, bakery, the guys who make the brownies for Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Yeah.
And their open hiring model. So imagine if we thought about this idea of belonging to the concentric circles outside of our organization, like in terms of our communities. And so, one of the leaders that we spoke to was Joseph Kenner from Grayston Bakeries, and their open hiring model enables people in their communities around Grayston to be able to put their name on a list and get the next ground floor job that's going with no questions asked, no interview. And so people with backgrounds who would normally find it really hard to get a job, like they've been incarcerated or they've been solo parents or they haven't got any experience, they're actually able to be welcomed into a workplace. Like that's belonging in a way that sometimes we just don't think about, right? And this open hiring model that Grayston have come up with is now being used at the Body Shop and like a number of big name organizations as a way of being able to include more people in our communities.
I'm thinking of leaders that I've met that really seem to use this belonging mindset as a superpower. And when I'm with them, they see the best in me and they show me off to other people, and they know exactly how I fit into the whole, to the greater whole that they're caring for. And they don't just do that for me, they do that for everyone around me. And something happens when they're in the room where we can all see each other and appreciate each other in a different way. It's yeah.
I remember facilitating this group of folk once, and I ended up having quite a bit of judgment about their ability to actually forward the agenda after a few meetings of not being able to make any progress. So I invited a friend of mine in who was an ace facilitator because he was such a great listening for greatness kind of guy. And I was gobsmacked by how much contribution this group of folk that I'd had no luck with could make towards this shared challenge that we had. It was the quality of the listening for greatness that made the difference.
The mindset of love and care is one derived from some of your talk with Bob.
Yeah.
What about your conversation with Bob kind of inspired you to qualify that mindset? Talk a little bit about that.
One of the things that really has struck me from his teaching has been this idea that, and I'm finding it really powerful when I'm talking to other leaders about this at the moment, is what if you imagine somebody you loved, like one of your precious children or a sibling or a parent, and them going off into the workplace? And then how would you like them to be treated? And can you imagine in your workplace the person in front of you being somebody's precious child, loved parent, loved sibling? And can you imagine treating that person in a way, imagining that person is loved by somebody? Like, what difference does that make to the way you engage with your fellow human being? So, I mean, Bob's a real inspiration to me when he tells stories about how he's found his way to truly human leadership with stories like that. But the other thing that I would say is that I've volunteered in domestic violence in my life, and that has deepened my appreciation for when people come into the workplace, we don't know what they're dealing with outside of work. We don't know the story that they've come from. Were they one of those children whose homes I walked into when there'd been an arrest made for domestic violence, and we had to find some rescue space, some refuge space for that mother and her children? And what decisions were made by those children at that young age about how well they can trust adults, how well they can be taken care of in the world? And so I feel like this idea of having compassion for our fellow human beings, like not knowing what the story is for this human being in front of us and how they make sense of the world. So can I just have some compassion for this fellow human being and treat them with love and care?
Mindset 5 talks about human systems. Naryan, could you tell me what you mean by human systems and why human workplaces aren't possible without human systems.
This one comes quite naturally to me. It's this integration mindset that uses, I guess, like some of the language would be around systems thinking and being able to understand the context of the workforce. See all the relationships and understand how different people interact, how they interact with the policies that you create, how that is shaped by our cultural norms, and this continuous sort of zooming in and zooming out, seeing the dynamics within each individual person and how that creates the culture. So with this mindset, I feel, or at least how it lives in me, is this curiosity to understand what's really going on here. How are things connected? And it leads to some different intuitions, actually, than a lot of what I see in more traditional leadership. So some of the differences that I would see would be, rather than seeking to control everything that happens, seeing it more as an emergent property of the conditions that we create. So it's about creating the conditions for the kinds of stories that we want to hear for those to emerge. And in some organizations, you'll hear a lot of talk about, okay, just show me the data. Tell me exactly what's the one root cause of our slumping sales right now. And someone who holds a human systems approach probably understands that there's more than one root cause, but maybe there's 5 or 6 causes that are all interconnected, and that if you try and change one of the factors, the other factors in the system will change as well, and you may end up with something quite unpredictable. And so there's a totally different way of leading, and this style of leading, leading in complexity, leading the system, is quite powerful for people who are trying to create more human workplaces, because I think the human experience is not one that is like a machine or an engine to be tinkered with and planned out ahead of time. There's no blueprint to follow. It really is a lot more organic, and a gardening metaphor might be more appropriate.
In terms of thinking about these different 5 mindsets, what would be the best way to assimilate all of these into your leadership or your thinking?
I think there's probably 2 ways in. And one is to read the leader stories in the book and find where you're inspired. And the other way in is to read the mindsets and see what resonates with you, and see if there's a way in which you can call a mindset in more explicitly, like playing, practicing, experimenting. Because there isn't a right answer about how to do this. It could be frustrating, or it could be really empowering, right? So yeah, I would you can start from the back of the book and read some leader stories and see what inspires you. Or you can, if you're a bit more theoretical, read the mindsets and see what resonates more than another. And it's not about picking one. It's about, like, if you can see the 5 in front of you during your day as a leader, there will be opportunities to be able to nudge your way into all of those mindsets should you choose. So it just seems that, like, we're inviting the reader to be able to hold a little bit more closely to our consciousness the possibility of these mindsets and the inspiration that the leaders provide.
It's funny using the format of a book, because what we're trying to do is put words to something that is more of a felt sense. And by sharing stories of other people who really are operating from different places than us, it's like, can we actually see the world through their eyes? Can we somehow let a little bit of what they're up to rub off on us? And so maybe, and I like to give the advice that I need to hear. How do I find leaders that really inspire me with how they're seeing the world and how they're doing something that almost seems like magic to me, because I can't do it myself, don't even know where to start. How do I build relationships with those people and to feel open enough that I can let some of their magic rub off on me? I wonder if that might be a fun way to start to absorb some of these, just to look around at who's in your life already that seems to be embodying something. Maybe it's not one of these mindsets, but it's something totally new. But they are creating the conditions for human work. When I picture somebody picking up this book, I'm hoping they have the appetite to, I guess, devour the book, to pick it up and read and go, yes, this is what I've needed. It's got language for something that I could feel before, and they read through it front to back, in the middle, bookmarking things, and they can use it to have conversations with the people around them. And yeah, it's almost like I would love to be a part of a network of people who have shared language around all of these different ways of making work more human, and that the people who read this book don't feel like they're alone. Maybe they've been doing this by themselves for a while, or maybe they have lost hope or something like that. Like I almost see this as a lightning rod, an inspiration, but something to catalyze a larger conversation and to help it grow. There are a bunch of other books in the field. We actually did a bit of a literature review before writing this one that each describe sort of different pathways towards creating more human work. And I think the magic is going to come when enough leaders look around and see each other, like 10% of the organization really is believing in this, and something new becomes possible when these people have language to join each other in conversation and start to connect.
I would come back, Brent, to the question, the quote that you used at the beginning of our time together today, which is from the book, what if the best workplace we've experienced is just a fraction of what's possible? So the hope for me is that we start having more conversations about what might it look like to have more truly human workplaces, and what might we dare to dream of differently for our organizations and the relationships between the humans and the organizations in a time where we're asking questions about the power of AI. And so I have this dream that I can see people pouring out of office blocks and home office homes at the end of a day, where you can just see on their faces that they are not a worn out shell of themselves, that they are in fact a full whole human going home to do the best job they can, to be good humans to those that they love and their communities. May that be so.
So what if the best workplace we've ever experienced is just a fraction of what is possible? What are we going to do about it? Maybe we're due for changes in our leadership mindset. If you want to know how to find the book, Human Work, 5 Leadership Mindsets for Humanizing the Workplace, or find out more about Leanne and Naryan and the Human Work Network, go to humanworknetwork.com. And don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and you'll find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.